then I would actually like to start and give the floor actually to the only lady we have on the panel. But next time we'll try better. Last time we had 3 ladies, so I would like to give the floor to Dr. Weeda Mehran to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here at this great panel. Glad to be here again with EFSAS series of talks. So I was asked to speak about Taliban's media strategy in Afghanistan, and as an example of an insurgent groups or a terrorist group, however you label it. So my analysis is basically based on years of research on Taliban and other extremist groups, media strategies and media outputs. So essentially today, when I'm talking about Taliban's media strategy, I divided in 3 parts. Starting with very brief introduction of how the Taliban was, their media, how the Taliban's use of technology and media was pre-2001, and from 2003 onwards, how it evolved and changed. And then I will highlight at the very end the strategic choices that were made by the Taliban, which helped the group build an image of itself and propagate messages that could be appealing to some segments of the population, and also help the group actually rise in power and take over Afghanistan. It was the Taliban's media strategy was a great help for the group's propaganda campaign. So as we all might know, that the Taliban's media use of technology and media in pre-2001, it was very limited. Then they had actually banned the internet, dismantled the state-run television. People were not allowed to take photographs, and pictures were not allowed. They had banned music, and the Taliban at the time, it was very, and then slowly afterward, this was the image of the Taliban we had, and how they were, the only way that they were, the only technological means were used by the Taliban that they would pass on their messages to the population was actually to radio, and TVs were not allowed during Taliban's regime in mid-90s. And once the country was taken, following 2001, when the Taliban were ousted from Afghanistan and the military intervention happened in the country, then that media strategy of the Taliban switched and it changed. And from particularly 2003 onwards, when the group started actually reshaping itself and coming together and becoming an insurgent groups, challenging the government, the former government of Afghanistan, they also focused a lot on their media strategy. In the words of Zabiullah Mujahid, the spokesperson of the Taliban, quote, "We are trying to make the most out of the modern technologies to suit our needs," unquote. So, and that is the strategy actually that was implemented, a rigorous media strategy implemented by the Taliban to as many, when we compare this strategy with a lot of other terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, such as ISIS, you would see that it has evolved significantly over years for the Taliban. So the Taliban with their new, with the evolving media strategy, they've become a lot more tech savvy, and they also the strategic choices that they made during this time also helped them a lot. So they began in 2003 with the launch of their official website, Al-Imara, and it has been publishing articles and publishing videos, audios, magazines in many different languages, in Arabic, in Pashto, in Persian, and in English. And the message has been the message of these the message of Taliban based depended upon also upon the kind of language they were also using. So the message changed in different languages. So the message that they would send in Arabic material was, for example, different than the message that the Taliban would send in Persian or in Pashto material. So this sophisticated messaging strategy was in place, and despite the fact that the Taliban's Al-Imara website was taken down a few times, it kept moving around and circling and popping up elsewhere. And it's still actually that website exists, and it is the official website of the Taliban. So in addition to the use of website, the Taliban also has been using social media quite extensively in more recent times. Since the Taliban has actually a long history of its presence on Twitter. The spokespersons of the Taliban and the followers of the group have been active and present on Twitter. On Facebook as well, there were various Taliban communities that do exist on Facebook, and they get together, they message each other, and connect with each other, pass on battle news to each other. Taliban has been videos of the Taliban and their messages have also been shared on YouTube. So the Taliban has made good use of, for their own purposes, good use of YouTube and Telegram, TikTok. So these are some of the social media platforms that the Taliban has successfully been using to propagate its various messages in the past 17 years until recent times. So what the Taliban has done, which is quite interesting and smart in general, is that, and it helped the group actually to take over Afghanistan and be successful in its aims, has been these media messaging strategies that the group developed to successfully attract attention, attract followers and potential recruits, as well as give an image of the group that would be acceptable for sympathizers and empathizers. So for example, when the Taliban, some of the messages that the Taliban would send, the information, the psychological operations that the Taliban launched through various media strategies in the country has been to portray itself as always a group that is rooted in Afghanistan, that would take some of the linguistic markers, some of the cultural markers of the country, and incorporate that into their messages so that it would resonate to the local population. And Taliban in general, once we actually compare it to some other groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, had in general portrayed itself as a nationalist group, as a group that has risen out of Afghanistan and was fighting for freedom of the country. And that has been a very successful messaging strategy from the standpoint of the Taliban. Versus if we compare this, and this has also been discussed extensively in some of the research done on Taliban's media strategies and messaging strategies in general, that if we compare this with some of the messages that in former ANDSF, Afghan National Defense and Security Forces have put out, and also NATO forces in Afghanistan put out, it has been a lot more successful than the messaging strategies of, for example, NATO, because of this particular reason that the Taliban used the language markers, the linguistic characteristics of the Afghan society, and localized their message, which was appealing to the local population. And also, the other advantage that the Taliban's media strategy had during the past 20 years or so, until the fall of the fall of the government and victory of the Taliban, was that if we compare their messaging strategy with some of the NATO, for example, and Afghan government, former Afghan government, the Taliban was taking battlefield information and news, most of the times videotaped by the fighters themselves or an embedded media unit within the Taliban fighters who would actually relay the message, sometimes in real time, and capture the whole situation, and then post and update those videos on their websites and propagate them through their social media outlets. Now that message directly taken from the field and really in expedited manner circulated helped the Taliban to pass its message and propagate its message much faster than the Afghan government, and also much faster than the NATO forces, who are bound by bureaucratic rules that the message, on any message that would come out of those entities would have to go through the chain of command and bureaucracy, and the message as such would fall behind the Taliban's message, which had already been publicized. So all of these actually combined together gave an image of the Taliban that was that the Taliban managed to send their message in a faster, more expedited manner and portray itself as a localized, as a national entity in many regards amongst its sympathizers and empathizers. So when the Taliban started after the negotiations with the US and the troops withdrawal agreement that they signed and capitalized on that as a victory for the Taliban. So when the Taliban was sending these messages out and the attack on some of the cities and provinces of the country was happening prior to the fall of Kabul, and we saw that a lot of these cities and provinces would fall to the Taliban without a fight. Now, I'm not saying that this is all because of the media strategies of the Taliban, but the media, this whole media strategy of the Taliban really helped the group. It was a very important factor in Taliban's victory. Why is that? Because the Taliban, there we have incidents that because the Taliban portrayed itself as a nationalist group, because it managed to actually attract a lot of sympathizers and empathizers in areas under control of the government, when the Taliban would actually enter a city, or they were trying to enter a city and take over particular territories, they always had some supporters and empathizers, and particularly religious scholars in some parts of the country and elders of the community, who would then be used to actually present the case of the Taliban and negotiate on behalf of the Taliban with some of the ANSF, for example, the Afghan National Security Forces, or the resistance movement. The resistance movement that was the popular resistance movement that was being formed in some parts of the country, for example, in Herat, when Ismail Khan was, he's a strongman in Herat and a former warlord, and he was one of the people who started the resistance in Herat, in one of the provinces in the country, to fight against the Taliban. There were some elders of the community and also religious scholars who went to talk to Ismail Khan and on behalf of the Taliban, and in order to convince him not to fight. And the messages and the discussions, the kind of language they were using to convince him is clearly the message of the Taliban, the kind of language that the Taliban has been using, trying to attract that kind of force inside Afghanistan and their sympathizers. So all of that together, we can see that the Taliban over years, from not using any pictures and images, not allowing those videos or TVs, has evolved quite a lot in terms of its media strategy. Nowadays, the Taliban knows the power of media, and having taken care over the country, it has come up where it knows the importance of the media, and it knows that it's being under watchful gaze of international community and Afghans as well, and is doing its best not to actually portray itself in a way that it would undermine undermine all the potential legitimacy of the country, the legitimacy of the Taliban and other countries from recognizing its legitimacy. So the Taliban has is aware of the media, how the impact of media on the image of the Taliban, and is given its very savvy PR campaign that the Taliban has launched in Afghanistan. It is hoping that by being actively portraying itself and saying things that the international community wants to hear, that the group will be accepted and the government that it has recently formed will be accepted by the international community. Now, the Taliban so far, and that impact of the media and how concerned the Taliban is about its image can be observed based on the fact that how Taliban, now in power, acts in cities like Kabul because versus other cities and the rest of the country, because the Taliban knows that it is being watched in Kabul particularly, and all the eyes are on the group. They refrain from resorting to violence. They refrain from, in most parts, from public punishments and executions and many other negative images that the Taliban have been known for when they were in power in mid-1990s. Versus we hear these stories and we hear incidents of those, the other image of the Taliban, the other picture of the Taliban that in other provinces of the country, which is different from what it is, what the Taliban is doing in Kabul. So now the concerns are in Afghanistan that the Taliban, despite the fact that it has been using internet and social media and media technologies to promote the group and propagate its message and for its own purposes. Now the group has realized that the same technology and access to mobile phones and smartphones and social media can actually undermine the group itself. So that is why in certain parts of the country, sometimes we see that the Taliban has been disrupting the internet usage and also preventing people from using their cell phones and smartphones to actually record some of the incidents that take place in the country, or to relay the news, or even sometimes a crackdown at journalists and reporters, photojournalists and reporters who are trying to capture the news and distribute the information about what is happening inside the country. So it is, that's essentially my take on Taliban's use of technology and media and evolution over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehran. We just have, while you were talking, I just want to go, before I make a quick recap, to one question which we got, which is specifically related to this. So that's why I'm going to ask you that. Is that, how do you think that the Taliban's, you know, you said that in the beginning, in the end of the last century, they were not very tech savvy. They were not using it. They banned, for example, TV and movies. How do you think now that they're using it much more, how will they make it compatible with their vision of religion? So, you know, they banned it, of course, so many years ago, because according to them, it was not within the boundaries of religion. And now they're making use of it quite heavily. How will they make that compatible with their vision of religion they have, but also the vision of religion they want to give to the people?
Well, Well, what they've been doing is that they try so far in terms of, you can analyze that from a couple of different perspectives, so in different lines. So if we analyze it from the Taliban's control in terms of local media, because we had, I'm sorry to say we had, because until only a month or so ago, we we had those a lot of TV stations in the country and radio that right now the Taliban has imposed bans on certain videos that should and should not be showed in those TV stations. A whole bunch of them have been closed down. Unfortunately, I do not have any solid statistics for how many, but about hundreds of video and TV stations have been closed down by the Taliban in the country. And some of the major TV stations have been directed on what can appear and should appear or shouldn't appear on those stations. But for so that's from the perspective of once the Taliban came into power, and that's how they want to control media. And also from the perspective of the group, and in terms of why it is from not allowing people to actually take pictures or make home videos in mid-90s, all the way to going to capturing those images and videos themselves and distributing them pretty widely. So it had its strategic purposes, and what they did probably to justify this is exclusion of certain topics and inclusion of others, exclusion of certain actors and inclusion of others. So for the Taliban, the Taliban has no video or shown no video throughout its essentially from 2003 until now, any women in their videos, as far as I know, as far as I've analyzed their videos. They would not show any of unless there were children, female girls, if they were victims or in burqas, very rarely. Until recently that the group has taken over, and they in Afghanistan, and sometimes you can see they showed acceptable outfit for women who were all in burqa, black outfit, showing no face, and not even their hands were showing, which is very characteristic of what we observe in other groups, such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And that is not the outfit that Afghan women have been wearing traditionally, our great-grandmothers have been wearing, or our parents and the next generation in Afghanistan. So what the Taliban has eventually done is their interpretation of what is religiously acceptable and unacceptable. And they've portrayed that throughout their own media products, and also the way they want to control the Afghan TV stations and radio stations.